So there's, in total in the state, we have roughly 45,000 employees. The state's annual budget is roughly 40 billion last year, and this year the proposal is around $45 billion in annual revenue. I call it revenue, but it's not really revenue. So that's sort of the context. So my role, I'm in the office of the CIO. There are roughly 4,000 or so IT professionals in the state, and the office that I'm in was created by the legislature to make sure that we're not really being stupid when it comes to investing in technology. So that even though these 80 or so agencies run their own business, have their own technology teams, at least we're taking a sort of consistent approach on how we're investing in technology and what direction are we going, and is there a way we can leverage some common technology. So that's the purpose. One of the purposes of my office is to set the strategic vision and strategies for technology, as well as provide some oversight. So as an agency is requesting, I don't know, $40 million to do some sort of major system replacement, where is this sort of third-party oversight coming from? Well, my office is overseeing those projects to make sure that they are thoughtful, they've planned it out, they've thought it through, and are taking an approach that makes sense. The other piece of what we do is to transform government, and transform government through technology, and well, there's technology in the future, also include culture. But transform it through technology. And when I say technology, I'm not just talking about hardware, software. I'm also talking about social technology, best practices like Agile, Scrum, Lean Startup, these sorts of things. And Agile is just one example. Lean has been an area of focus for state government for quite some time. It actually was started with Christine Gregoire, the previous governor, and a lot of agencies they're in fact mandated to have Lean people on staff to help their agency find efficiencies and improve government. But one of my areas of focus in terms of the IT space is recruitment and retention, and how do we create, how we be an employer of choice in state government, particularly since we have such stiff competition in the region with Amazon, Microsoft, Disney, F5, Expedia, just go on and on and on. So the part of that problem, I think, sort of to link it with unutilized skills, is actually having an environment which maximizes the value that individuals can actually contribute in an environment. And so I'll talk about this a little bit later when I start talking about self-organization. But part of the purpose in that is to maximize the utilization of skill. Okay, so there are several agencies that have a fairly active Agile Scrum practice within the agency. It's not as if the entire state is Agile, right? That would be completely aligned if that were the case. It'd be awesome, because then I could work on something else. But it'd be completely awesome, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is we've got pockets of Agile happening in state government, and it's just starting to grow. Okay? One of my roles is to essentially identify impediments that the state has in terms of adopting Agile. So some of the impediments are having the right tools and having good contracts that allow agencies to access Agile coaching and these sorts of things. Contracting, which I'll talk about that in a second. But there's a lot of agencies that are actively working on Agile practices. So there's probably the most sophisticated one, of course, is our agency. We have a project that we call the Biz Hub, which is a central portal for small businesses to engage state government. If you're in a small business, or any business really, it can be really confusing to navigate the state bureaucracy. How do I get my licenses, and how often do I have to file for whatever my revenue? And most companies don't know who to talk to, which agency to talk to. It's complex. So this is a project that's around trying to create a single interface for small businesses in particular, so they don't have to worry about navigating that complexity. And that is run as a Scrum project. We work on 1-week sprints, asking whatever questions you want about that. So employment security is another, labor and industries, and the part of licensing. Part of licensing is probably one we've all experienced, right? This renew your tabs and license whatever. So they're are probably further ahead than most of the other agencies in terms of Agile adoption. And it's not the entire agency; it's sort of pockets. as they're trying to upgrade their systems and taking an Agile approach to it. The agencies that are implementing Agile, with the exception of one, are largely applying it in a software development context. You can't really tell too well, but this is the BizHub project that's talking about in our office. So this is our office, part of our office here. They're doing a sprint or a product demo for a group. The first thing that kind of startles people is that our walls aren't gray. They're actually, we do have color, so there's green and orange, and how do we pick the colors? Just, I don't know, whatever, whatever the team wanted, didn't care. But we not only do we practice Agile Scrum, but we also practice some other disciplines. So it's customer-driven design was the first part of this project, which meant going out and actually talking to businesses to find out what is the problems that they have. And you can't see here, but this is a bunch of Post-it notes, and it's a collection of all of the feedback that we got from a couple hundred different businesses, and it's a sensing exercise to try to identify what are the what are the sort of the common themes, and then we applied a viability, desirability, and feasibility sort of metric to each of these problems and ideas to see which ones actually were the most probable in terms of success as well as solving real problems. And then we identified the first increment of success and began the next step. So the other one is Lean Startup is the other. So if you're familiar with the Lean Startup methodology in that book, that's something we practice. So identifying what is the hypothesis that we're trying to test it and iterate on different prototypes with increasing fidelity. And then finally into the Scrum, which is over in the far end, which is actually applying Agile Scrum methodologies to build stuff. And that's the phase we're at now. I didn't mention software development in my office. We actually don't do software development per se in my office. We're largely an oversight kind of group. But we're doing software development here, and so why is that? Well, what happened is this particular problem that I described is a problem that's persisted literally for decades. It's a well-known problem. Businesses have been complaining about it, and just about every single year, one of the agencies, we call them UBI agencies, the agencies that deal with businesses, one of the agencies would put forth a proposal to solve this problem. But the proposal was often a $20 million proposal, $30 million, $40 million proposal. And the legislature was just, we just don't have $20 million or $30 or $40 million, and I'm not sure it's that size of a problem. But and part of that is also what's sort of interesting is the poster child use case that was used as the argument for why this needs to be done was well, I'm a small business, I go to change my address, and I have to go tell Secretary of State what my new address is, then I have to go tell L&I, and I have to tell Employment Security, I had to go to all these different agencies just to change my address. And that was sort of the poster child problem of why we need to solve this. Last year, here again, another agency put forth a proposal to solve this problem. It was $20 million, and the led said, we just don't, we're in a recession, we just don't have $20 million. And so we stepped in, and we said, you know what? We think, and we want to demonstrate how you can take a $20 million problem and solve it in an agile way, and solve it incrementally. And so we're asking for less than $1 million, and we're going to produce value in the first year. And we'll come back, and we'll show you what we did. And we actually don't even know what problem we're going to solve, because we're going to talk to the customers and find out what problem we need to solve it, and we'll find out from there. But we'll come back in a year, we'll tell you the problem that we've identified with customer input, and we'll tell you what's the next problem that we're going to solve, and we'll tell you how much that costs. And then you, legislature, can choose as to whether you want to invest in that. And they were all over it. It was like candy for them. Because usually the problem that they encounter is they say, hey, we need $20 million to solve this problem, and we'll have it done in 5 years. They come back 5 years later and they say, well, actually, it was more complicated than we thought. We really need another $20 million, right? And actually, if you don't give us the $20 million, you get nothing, because we spend the $20 million, just getting to where we're at. And so this was sort of the frustration the legislature feels. So we demonstrated what the first increment was, and we asked for some more money this year, and they were just all over it. They just jumped on it. So it was the first thing to make it through the legislature. I was like, yeah, it wasn't a contest. The funny thing is, we talked to 200 or so different businesses across state and asked them, what were their experience working with state government and what were the problems. Not a single one of them mentioned changing my address is too complicated. Never came up. Never came up. So this poster child, problem actually doesn't even exist. The problem's something different. So we follow this as a really see it, but it's basically this is the velocity chart, and then burnout charts and so forth.
So as a small business, I'm interested to know what problem you are solving.
The two problems that popped up at the top in terms of the greatest impact and also the greatest the greatest desirability for small businesses, as well as the greatest feasibility to solve, where the first one was companies. It's kind of what I described earlier. Small companies didn't really know where to go, to what agency. And so the solution that we proposed, that we prototyped and tested, was, well, what if, and it's kind of obvious, but what if we had a single portal that instead of you asking a question, that you could pose a question, and it would go out and do an aggregate search of all the content and information from these different agencies, and would present you with, well, here are the different answers to your question. How do I start a business? Well, it kind of depends on what business you're talking about. So if I'm starting a taco truck, that's different than starting a scuba instruction business or whatever, right? Scuba diving instruction. So you pose that question, and it would tell you, well, here are the different, how you start a business, here's how you do it, and here's the information from the different sources. So an aggregate search across multiple agencies. So that's live today, and you can take a look at it. And it's a narrated search, and we used all cloud-based services, et cetera. The next, and we're still iterating on that, so there's still a lot of opportunity to continuously improve that experience. The next problem that we're intending to solve this next year that came up as a pretty prevalent thing was that businesses would call one agency. They say, yeah, I'm Joe's Taco Truck, and here's kind of what my business is, and I got this problem, and can you help me out? So they take 10 or 15 minutes explaining what their business is, and then this agency says, oh yeah, okay, well here's some information. To get the rest of it, you need to talk to this other agency. So then I go talk to this other agency and say, yeah, I'm Joe's Taco Truck, and they spend another 15 minutes explaining their business. And they come back 6 months later, and every single time they had to re-explain their business. It was like every single call was the first time they were calling the state. So the state really had no CRM, right? No way to maintain knowledge about what this business is and what are the challenges that they had in the past. So having sort of this persistent identity, so when you call, you're not starting from scratch. So that's sort of the next problem set.
Is that something that concerns government agencies using software as a service?
Yeah, so we do have some requirements, and the way we approach that problem is, one, understanding what is the data that we're actually talking about.
Right. So
some data is extremely public, and who cares where it is, right? It can be out on Amazon or whatever, and there's really not a lot of security requirements for it because it's actually public information,
right.
A website.
Right.
So, but then there's other data that's much more sensitive, and we care a lot more about it. Things like your social security number, and more details, health information, whatever that we might have. So that data we're a lot more sensitive about, and we have a much more stringent security requirements around it. The reality is, a lot of the cloud providers can provide better security solutions than what we can afford internally within the state. So for us, cloud is actually one of the strategies for increasing the security footprint within the state government. So we have, but still the requirement is that it has to be within state U.S. soil. So it has to be somewhere in the continental U.S. We don't store things overseas, just so that we can apply state or U.S. law to things. So when we partner with Amazon or Azure or whatever, we pick data centers that are within. The other thing you might notice is that we practice an open office design, right? So it's not cube farms, although most state governments cube farms. Let's see, what's next here? Oh yeah, so here's some of the interesting, maybe non-traditional Agile things. So I mentioned that our office is part responsible for oversight. So there's a $20 million project at some agency, say employment security, for example. We're obligated by state law to oversee that project and make sure they're doing the right things, and they've got a good plan. And so as I start to say that, it kind of starts to sound like waterfall right in your head. At least it should to you, because it does to me. But the interesting question is, how do you do oversight in QA, like like, this kind of QA, not the code QA and product QA, but really in the project management QA context. How do you do that kind of QA in this government context in an agile sort of project, right? In a waterfall project, you track scope, schedule, budget, and you look at variance, and you monitor the risks that are identified, and you look at the team, and are they working together? Is there good? Is the steering committee? Are they engaged? Is there executive sponsorship? And all these sorts of things is what you would expect to see in a waterfall oversight sort of scorecard. The question is, what is it in an agile context? And we haven't really found anything that did a good job providing oversight in agile projects. So we developed something. And the scorecard is measuring things like the business process. Is there a backlog? Is the team actually maintaining a backlog of the work? Are we tracking velocity and throughput? Are we doing stakeholder demos? So it's the sort of the agile activities. Are they actually occurring? Right? So this is around the business process, but there's 4 different categories, and it's all around the agile performance. And this is public information. You can go out and see it, but it's the first that we're aware of that's being developed, and now California is looking at adopting it for agile projects. Okay? So part of this is to create some libraries so that agencies know how to do agile projects, large-scale agile projects, and provide appropriate QA and oversight. We still have steering committees, but they, in an agile, you have to have, like the product owner, right? So there's a different level of engagement on the business, a different expectation in terms of the level of frequency of engagement. So one of the metrics is the business actually engaged, and it's got to be more frequent than the steering committee. The steering committees, what's different is we do more product demos. So at the end of a particular sprint or release, we're demonstrating what is it we produced, and just demonstrating that value instead of what they would normally see, which is at the end of 5 years. I hope this is what you wanted, Phil. But the questions here aren't necessarily. Even with an off-the-shelf product, you're going to have a backlog. You're going to have sprints, and you're going to have tasks related to implementing an off-the-shelf product. You still have to configure it. You got to put it in an environment, and so. So
this looks like an agile maturity checklist or something.
Yeah, it's largely an agile. Yeah, it's largely agile, except it's across multiple dimensions that are beyond just the team itself, but it's the business, the larger system. Yeah.
What do you think about it so far? Do you like that approach? People have embraced it.
It's been really helpful for the team, and the tension that we were trying to resolve is the team is operating in an agile Scrum context, but the existing standards the state had for how you do QA just didn't make any sense. I mean, there wasn't a crosswalk. And it's our office's responsibility to establish what those standards are. So that's part of the advantage of having this in-house development work, is it allows us to vet and transform our own policies and standards that the rest of the agencies have to use.
Did you have any problems getting people to embrace it who are more used to steering committee,
Well, largely there's only this one project that's used it within the state of Washington. So the first buy-off is we have a team of 3 oversight consultants who've had this job of overseeing projects for a long time. So the first buy-off is, does this make sense to you guys? And the next step is applied to a larger scale project. The other sort of validation of this is California is adopting this and getting ready on it. So it does seem to have some applicability across government in general. So one of my favorite places to teach Agile is actually the Scrum Inc.'s XM workshop, Extreme Manufacturing Workshop. It's done in Linwood. What I love about it is it's essentially a Scrum Master class, but instead of the twisty pipe cleaners for your lab, it's actually a car. You're building a 100-mile-per-gallon car. And what's fun about it is most of the people that attend this class are people that are applying Agile in a manufacturing context. But I love sending people here because it's applying Agile in a non-software context. You can do it outside the software. So here's a bunch of people that are from the state of Washington as well as other organizations building this, taking a Scrum Master class in a garage, same garage where I met Arun. And here's that thumbs up, so he's having fun. So here's all these people, state of Washington doing Scrum Master. And then here's a picture of the office, one of the offices. So they've got, they've taken that, they've brought it back, and they've got, their Scrum, methodology up on the wall. They've got, Kanban boards of various types. They've got manifestos, and this culture is propagating. Now, what's fascinating about this is those people and this content is in the procurement and contracts management shop in state government. So these are people that are applying Scrum and Agile in a contract management context. In fact, they've taken the Agile Manifesto and they've rewritten it, our Agile Procurement Manifesto, and they practice what they call XP. Not preparing, but it's extreme procurement.
I heard that Washington State does $1 billion a year procurement of IT.
Washington State budget for IT is like $1 billion a year.
Yeah.
Actually, it's closer to $2 billion, including higher ed. So what's exciting is, Agile contracting. So Agile contracting can mean two different things. So the first thing it could mean is the process by which you identify something to buy, and in the process of getting the contracts in place and actually procuring it, right? Are you taking an Agile approach to how you build that contract? So yes, that's what they're trying to do here, and they have one of their little principles here is that they value change in the contract at any time. It's in the process, right? It's not going to blow your mind, like what the heck are you talking about?
This is
These guys are from Mars.
Procurement people?
These are procurement people.
And you got them to buy into this?
Oh yeah, they were having a blast. Oh yeah, they're having a good time. Yes.
Is it the anti-RFP kind of thing?
No, RFPs are, so in state law, we're required to have all procurements be competitive.
So you have RFPs that can be changed?
Well, you can construct an RFP that's
true.
very simple,
can have
straightforward.
amendments to
Right.
it. Yeah.
So I just described one way, or when you say Agile contracting, one concept, okay? But there's another concept that's probably more relevant to a larger audience, which is the terms and conditions in a contract that enable Agile projects. Right? So there is, every organization has standard terms and conditions, and state government, of course, is no exception. And some of these, in a standard approach to how you evaluate vendors and how you pay vendors for goods and services. But if you have an Agile project, you often can't use those terms and conditions because the standard terms and conditions says, there's Appendix A, which has got 1,000 business requirements, and this is what we want you to build. Well, that's not Agile, right? So you have to have different terms and conditions that don't have that as an expectation. Instead, what you describe is, here's a vision of what we need, problem we need solved, and there's more terms around how we're going to work with the vendors, what the expectations of the vendors in terms of roles and responsibilities. Who's Scrum Master, what's the iterations, the sprints, sprint duration, that sort of thing. The other aspect is, how do you pay? In a waterfall, it's typically, we have these milestones, or we've got these phases, and we'll pay for, at the end of phase 1, which is going to be 12 months, you're going to deliver a enterprise architecture document that'll tell us how we're going to build this thing, and we'll pay you a number of dollars to build that. So that's kind of, and then the next thing is, okay, we'll do some sort of QA thing and some development, and so you have these sort of stages that you're paying. Unfortunately, none of these things actually have any value, right? It's not to the end. So in an Agile world, well, how do you pay when you don't have this document or whatever that is? So you pay, there's different ways of paying. You pay on a value point basis. Maybe you pay per product demo or sprint review. Maybe you pay, at intervals of every 2 weeks, or whatever your sprint duration is. So there's different ways of paying that's really had not been considered in a traditional sense. So the terms and conditions in a contract to support an Agile approach to a problem is the other aspect of Agile contracting. So that's the piece that we're just about wrapping up now. I think, and this, like I said, we're right at the point of having a different set of standards around terms and conditions for Agile contracts. And I've talked to vendors about this concept, and I think we're going to get two different reactions from the vendor community. We're going to get one reaction from vendors who actually practice Agile, saying, oh my God, it's awesome, yes. And then we're going to get another reaction from vendors who say they practice Agile but actually don't. Saying, you guys are from Mars, what the hell are you doing? This is not how you do stuff. So I think those are the 2 reactions we're going to get. So that's Agile contracting and Agile procurement in state government, the only state that's actually practiced this. I've talked at, I'm in this sort of community of state CIOs, and I was talking about Agile, this topic in a little more detail at a conference we just had 3 months ago or so. And half the audience thought it was from Mars. They had no idea what I was talking about. So we're definitely leading the country in Agile adoption there. Okay, so the one thing that we've been practicing for the last 4 or 5 months in the state of Washington is self-organization, self-governing model. Basically, the concept behind self-organization, self-governing is to empower the employees to make the decisions and use them as sensors for what really does the organization need to do. You sort of only direction you give them largely is a purpose that they need to accomplish, but you empower them to organize themselves and govern themselves. And the particular model that we've implemented in in my office is Holacracy. So Holacracy is a particular type of self-organization, self-governance, and in that context, there are no managers. So within part of the office that I control, I'm not a manager. In fact, everyone there loves to tell me that I'm not the boss of them. So that's sort of the downside, is people snubbing, nose at you. But we're practicing Holacracy, and in fact, this is the next generation of the circle. But if you're interested in Holacracy, you can go to holacracy.org and learn about it. What's cool for me, what I love about it, is there is no government in the world that's ever practiced Holacracy. We're the first, the state of Washington. Is the fact that Holacracy's never been, I don't think any self-organization, self-governance model has ever been practiced in a represented workforce. We're also the first there. Actually, the person who introduced me to Holacracy was Arun. Arun mentioned it one day. I tell people this story. I tell them I was talking to a friend of mine about this work group and sort of this problem I've been sort of chewing on for a couple of years, which is how do we make the state of Washington an employer of choice? And I've been on these various executive work groups trying to solve this problem, right? And I've been extremely frustrated because the biggest ideas coming out of these groups is, how about Flex Fridays and teleworking? And that just seems so grossly inadequate and underwhelming. I couldn't stand it. And I came across Valve. Valve is Bellevue. They're a gaming company that's around for a decade, 500 employees or so. And they don't practice Holacracy, but they practice a form of self-organization, self-governance. And there's no managers. They've been doing it for, like, say, a decade. And employees, they decide how they want to work, and it's all up to them, as long as they achieve the purpose and serve these outcomes. And it's like, well, that's our competition, right? In terms of top talent, how the heck are we going to compete with that if we're talking about teleworking? And so anyways, I was telling my friend, who you all know as Arun, about this problem, and he goes, oh yeah, you should look at Holacracy. I couldn't spell it, he had to spell it for me. So I put it on a Post-it note, and I put it on my desk, and it sat there for months. And then I read a book called Reinventing Organizations from Frederick Laloux, and he talks about the sort of evolution of hierarchy and how companies have felt like there's this hierarchy is just constrained, there's all these problems with it, it's not quick enough, it's not responsive, and we need to do something different. For the last 30 years, companies have been doing something that's not hierarchy. He mentions Holacracy in that book. So that's like twice kind of them. So it must be a thing, right? So I became Holacracy practitioner certified. Almost didn't go. It's a week. Oh my God. It's just really a good spend of taxpayer money and time. So anyways, I decided to go. I needed to really get into the data before I dismissed it completely. And I walked out of there thinking, oh my God, what the heck are we doing organizing as a hierarchy? It's like caveman. And so now I walk around, I tell people, I walk around, and after practicing this for about 4 months, and I feel like I have a different set of lenses that I'm looking through work looking that work through. And as I talk to people who aren't in this Holacracy mindset, I see these evil spirits around them. They have no ideas there. And it's spirits like, bureaucracy, office politics, inefficient meetings, stakeholdering ideas, meetings to prepare for meetings. I mean, just all these sorts of things. And it just seems so absurd that we have we developed these habits in order to compensate for the deficiencies of a hard organization rather than actually changing the hard organization. And this is after thousands of years of evolution. We've been hired for a long time. So it just seems so ridiculous to me. It'd be like watching people using horse and carriage on I-5 or something. It's just really that strange. So thank you, Arun, for introducing me to the topic. So we're practicing it in our office of 20 people, and our office is going to be merging with 2 other agencies on July 1st. We'll be an organization of about 700 employees, and I'll be in charge of a division called eGov. And the purpose of eGov is to transform government through technology and culture. And in achieving that purpose, we will be implementing a larger pilot of Holacracy in government. And the pilot, I'm setting it up as an A/B test that's being created as a result of this merger. At 700 people. The name of that agency will be Washington Technology Solutions. We're calling it WATEC. One of the divisions in WATEC is eGov. The scope of Holacracy will just be within that WATEC company, and it will include eGov plus other parts of the company. I'm setting it up as an A/B test. It's true nature. The hypothesis is that self-organizing, self-governing models will produce better employee outcomes. This particular test is there to measure for a year, and we'll see what the results are. So we'll have this control, which is most of the organization, and then this maybe 100 people that are practicing Holacracy. It's caught the attention of Harvard Business School. They've been researching self-organizing, self-governing organizations for a few years now, but we're the only organization they've encountered that's actually trying a scientific approach to evaluating this methodology. So they're helping us design the study. There's 3 categories of metrics that we're looking for. The primary point of the hypothesis is that it affects employee outcomes differently. So employees are happier, they're happier, they are more engaged, they have a greater desire to want to stay, those sorts of things. So it's all around the employee engagement piece of it and recruitment retention. There's tons of science and data and research that shows that if you have happy employees, your company produces better outcomes. So I'm not really trying to prove that piece because the data is already there. But it's hard for me to do a test, something like this, it's really outside the box, without having some sort of customer metrics. So there'll be 2 other sets of metrics that I'll be measuring. One is customer outcomes, and in this context, customers are other agencies, it's not citizens. So what degree to provide services that entities are happy with, etc. And then the third one is to what degree will the organization that's practicing will actually produce better or more able to achieve the larger organizational objectives, whatever this happens to be. Okay. So those are the 3 categories of metrics, but primary, the 80% of the metrics are around employee engagement, happiness. Since it's an A/B test, and I'm only looking for, according to Harvard, the minimum size is around 100 people in order to have a sufficient number of data to make inferences at the end of the 1-year study. The approach for onboarding is, number 1, find people who are willing to opt in. So there has to be sort of the inherent desire, and it's really the teams and the work, not individuals, but the team has to want it. And that'll get me across most of the organizational change kinds of rules. The next is then the education side of it. And so we have partnered with Holacracy One, which is they're the founding company of this practice, and they offer coaching, facilitation, expertise, and that we use them today. And so they will help us ramp up the skill sets internally within state government in order to build that up so that they can then train a trainer kind of thing. So we can build up more expertise. We all know soccer. We were not all pros at soccer, we're absolutely not. But we all know, we understand the game of soccer, right? Balls at the end. Okay, so take what you know about soccer, and let's say that since the beginning of time, since soccer time, that the rules of soccer are what they are today, except a few modifications. Let's say that the soccer field was broken up into sections of the field, I don't know, 8 sections. Okay. And that in each section, there was a manager. And that manager had team members that they had to report to. And this is how you play the game. And so the way you became a manager was, well, through user experience, and you're pretty good at soccer, you know the rules, right? And the newer players, they were managers, they were just players. And in that context, you would have, as we all experience in organizations, different types of managers. Some managers are like, oh yeah, we're a good team, we take a team approach, whatever. And other managers are like, well, how the hell do I add value if I'm just another player? So the way I add value is, I'm smarter than you, you guys are idiots. So instead of you passing the ball to the team, you need to pass it to me first, because I actually know better as to who should get the ball. And I do. And so imagine that was how you played soccer. How would that look? Right? And how ridiculous is it to us to say that's how you run a soccer, right? So as ridiculous as that seems, that's exactly what we do with organizations. And Holacracy basically looks at that and says, well, that's stupid. Why don't we just tell the players what the rules of the games are and let them identify where they need to go, what's the best place, and let them make those decisions. So in the game where you have those managers, where's accountability? So there's a bad play. Who's accountable for it? Well, that person that kicked the ball. He's accountable because he actually kicked it right to the opposing team. So he's accountable. Well, no, he's not accountable because the manager is actually responsible for that section. So really it's the manager that's accountable. Well, no, because the manager had a policy that no ball left the region unless it went through the manager, and that employee just kicked it. So, well, who's actually accountable? And it's confusing, right? It's nebulous. In Holacracy context, when you play soccer without managers, when someone makes a bad play, who's making the bad play? The person kicking the ball. It's clear that in that moment, he has full authority, she has full authority to do what they need to, what they think is the best thing, right? So Holacracy is the same way. So there are these roles, and these roles are intended to achieve a particular purpose. And in a soccer game, there's roles, there's goalies, and there's defense, and whatever the other roles are. Holacracy is the same way. There's roles, and they're assigned a certain set of accountabilities. It's part of the makeup, and they're responsible for. That's what's expected of them, and it's clear, right? There is no, well, it's my boss's fault. With boss, it's you. You're the one who has accountability. So it's much clearer. So in our office, we don't have, outside of the day, we don't have represented employees. We are what we call exempt employees. We're at-will employees, fired at any time, like everyone else. It is, and I talked about it in my last 2 blog posts, I talked about the represented workforce and just sort of the implications. And I've talked to state HR director and to an attorney for the units for the last 20 years. So I have sort of reached out, but I need to reach out further. And the next step is to talk to what we refer to as a labor relations officer, and which is the person who negotiates with the union. And so it's a process. For me as a manager, what was awesome about it is, so I manage my work, my day-to-day work with actually a Kanban board, but I use a Scrum. So I can have weekly commitments, personal commitments, things I want to get done. And one of the things I do is I have on my work streams work that moves the needle for state government. So it's things like agile contracting and cloud adoption, cloud is actually a role. And then I have like this other work stream, which is like all the other crap. And my little quote to myself reminder is maximize what not to do here. So just minimize as much as possible. And when I looked at that, and this stuff is all important, right? And it's things like filling out forms and signing this and doing whatever. It's stuff that's important, but it just doesn't really move the needle. It just kind of runs. And what I discovered is that as passionate as I am about moving the needle, I was only able to spend 10% of my time moving the needle. 90% of my time is working on crap that just runs government. And it's because of my position, the authority of my position. I'm the one that has to do these things. Okay? So as a manager, I don't have a passion around a lot of these things at the bottom, but other people might. And so I'd love to just give them that. See, you go yourself out. You know, here's all the authority. Go hog wild. I want to spend more time doing the things that actually transform government. So, as a manager, that's sort of how my reaction is. Not every manager's going to react the same way. I'll share one experience that I had recently. It was actually, so this is public information. You can go to this website. You can read everything that I talk about there. This is our real org. I make this public, so everyone in the world can go and look at what org chart is, see what the roles are, see who's in the role, what are the accountabilities, right? It's all public. But just last week, we did this sort of splitting of the cells. It was one circle, but we're preparing ourselves for the merger come July 1st. So here's a change, and I'm the one that proposed that change. There's a governance meeting, there's an election on this. So there's a new meeting, so maybe to point by 9. But what was interesting about this is there was another person in the circle that just joined. They're not really practiced at Holacracy. I've been doing it for about 4 or 5 months now, and I'm certified in it. We both had a tension around the need to split this thing up, but our approach was very, very different. Her approach was what you would expect in a traditional hierarchical environment. My approach was the way I've learned in Holacracy. So what her approach was, is she wrote up, I think it was 2 pages, page and a half or so, explanation of what it was that she wanted to propose. So in Holacracy, there's a meeting called a governance meeting where these kinds of things come up, you resolve them there, and so forth. And she was preparing for that governance meeting. So she wrote up a 1.5 or 1 or 2 pager kind of explanation for what it was that she was wanting to do, and I think she explained which roles are moving and whatever that she wanted to propose. I actually have no idea, I never read it. She sent it to me and everyone else in the circle. And so I don't know how much time she spent writing that thing, probably an hour or 2 hours, who knows. And she sent it to everyone in the circle, and then she walked around everyone to stakeholder the idea. And she came into my office as one of the people, and of course, she came and she went, "Hey, yeah, did you read that email I sent you that we're talking about? I want to propose something." And I says, "No, I don't read governance materials outside of the governance meeting." And he was a little taken aback by that. And we talked for a little bit about it, but I was fairly dismissive on it. Not on her idea. I had no idea what the idea was, but governance handles that. I don't need to stakeholder. So she went around and talked to a bunch of people. So I don't know, maybe there's another 6 hours people stakeholdering it. And then there was an email thread, because she emailed it, and people started reacting, "Well, this and that, blah, blah, blah." And so I never read them, I just deleted them. And I estimate that she probably spent, or in total, 10 hours just preparing for the governance meeting, okay? When it came time for the governance meeting, she wasn't even prepared to present it. She was still trying to work through some issues. So I had my thing, I have a different tension that I was processing. And the tension I was processing was about the need to split these off, preparation for the new organization. I actually don't know what her tension was. But I spent maybe 5 minutes making the proposal in the tool there. Didn't talk to anyone about it in advance. We got to the meeting, I said, "Yeah, I got this, here's my tension, here's my proposal." We went through the process that is in Holacracy, and within less than 10 minutes, the proposal accepted and moved on. So in total, I spent 15 minutes talking about something in this sort of Holacracy content, in the Holacracy methodology, right? Whereas a person applying current sort of traditional practices, techniques, it was probably about 10 hours of time. So there's a form of waste there, right? Maybe that's the 9th form, I don't know. But it does add a new meeting, but the meetings are just way more efficient. And there's similarities and there's some differences. And one of the similarities is the bias towards action. So the Holacracy methodology is all about bias towards action and being iterative. And don't try to make up all these demons that might get created by doing this action. Let's see if they actually happen. If they do, then we can fix it. So it's sort of an incremental approach. So that's what they have in common. The difference is, and Brian Robertson, the founder of Holacracy, one describes it this way, which is that in that healthy habits in a dysfunctional system become dysfunctional habits in a healthy system. So the buy-in is one of those things that is a healthy habit that we've learned in our dysfunctional system of hierarchy to ensure that we get the results we want. But that kind of behavior is actually dysfunctional in a hierarchy. It's counterproductive. It's unnecessary, and it's just counterproductive.
Well, I mean, it's a form of tribalism. You're building up support so that you don't get killed.
Yeah, and it doesn't even happen in Holacracy. I mean, it's impossible there isn't really a buy-in kind of a thing, because people can object, but they actually have to have a valid objection, and there's a testing methodology in the Holacracy governance. So people can object. If they try to object and it doesn't meet one of these criteria for valid, they get shut down. And you quickly learn that what makes a valid objection.
In your experience with Holacracy so far, what percentage of the people getting into this do you think comes from like their own personal fit and mentality, and how they react? Like, do you feel like anyone could successfully operate in this method, or only certain mindsets? And how do you sort of identify that? And have you had issues with people not able to work in that way?
Yeah, I haven't had issues with people not working that way, but it's only because of the way I've set it up so far. So it's largely opt-in. So people have self-selected to participate, and that's how it'll be in the 100-person A/B test.
I'm curious to see, like, after you've gotten past the opt-in people, how effective can it be?
I have opinions about that, because I think there are certain culture, behaviors, personality types that are drawn to this more so than others. So the type of people that I think would not respond well to this kind of structure, let's talk about the managers first. So, so managers, period. Managers that have, that value their own self-worth around domain or number of people, or if that's their value system is based on span of control kind of stuff, they won't really work in this kind of context. If they have a value around actually making a difference and helping the organization, and like myself, I became manager because I saw it as a way of how I could remove impediments for the organization to get the purpose done. I don't really care about number of people and where I sit and that kind of stuff. So if the managers have that kind of, I think that's a differentiator between those two. With employees, I think there's a category of employees that really have no interest in being self-directed. They'd rather be told what to do. And I've encountered those people. There's like, I just want to be told what to do. I don't want to have to think about anything. I just work to live, and I just want this job so I can get my paycheck, and I really have no motivation. I just want to get my paycheck so I can go off and do the things I actually enjoy. And I want to do a good job when I'm here, but I have no interest in being self-directed. So for people in that context, I think they would struggle with it. I think there's a lot of people in that context that are driven there because of frustrations in the organization. So there's, I think, a huge opportunity to help those individuals. They just give up.
I guess part of your challenge then is how to make people feel comfortable enough to try to actually put themselves out.
Yeah, and my approach to that is going to be basically, start it. I mean, once it exists and people can see it happening, then it becomes less scary, and they'll want to participate.
So I don't know anything really about Holacracy, but what you've been saying, what would happen in a governance meeting where you have multiple people really passionate about the goal and maybe disagree about the best course of action? What would be I guess in practice method of finding some kind of consensus or resolving that conflict?
It's the Holacracy. Of course, Holacracy is essentially a makeup. It's a mashup of different practices, and includes actually Agile, Scrum. The tactical meeting is very similar to a daily stand-up kind of meeting. The practice around the issue you're talking about is the getting things done and this integrated decision-making methodology. But there isn't. It's not a consensus in Holacracy. It is if there are two individuals that are passionate about a particular solution or problem, and they're trying to resolve it, the first thing that happens in Holacracy is one of those individuals raises the issue, And the only individuals who are able to interact in the conversation are people actually impacted by the decision. Okay, so I may be very passionate about this particular thing, and I think it's I think you're doing it in a stupid way, and I have a better idea. But if it doesn't directly impact one of my roles that I'm accountable for, I actually have no voice in this conversation. So that's one of the tests. There's 5 tests. So one, it's about creating the priority around the governance meeting is to create a safe environment for an individual to express a tension or an issue, and allow them to make an incremental proposal to how that can be just slightly better. So we're not looking for the perfect solution, we're looking for just something that's a little bit better. And the question that gets asked is, if we were to do this, would it actually cause harm or set us back? Would it somehow reduce our capabilities? And the answer is no, it goes through. Okay, so if someone makes a proposal, but I feel some tension, but I don't actually have a valid objection, then I can raise my tension, and I can process that, but that's processed separately. Now, if there are 2 people and that they have a slightly different opinion about something, and it does impact both of them, and they pass the test of the valid objection, then it goes into an integrated decision-making round. But it's just those 2 people, and they identify what is what's the source of the friction, and how can we bridge that one little intersection.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't it like external tiebreaker person, manager person coming in and saying, you yes, you no? So interesting.
The facilitator's job is to help them get to an incremental improvement. And the challenge is always, would this actually cause harm if we were to try it? Or at least try it. Right. So that's kind of the...
So what's the coordinator, or you said there's a coordinator?
Facilitator.
Facilitator. Who is that? How's that work?
Facilitator, in every circle, there are predefined and required roles. There's there's at least 3. One's called the lead link, and the lead link is assigned by the parent circle, and they have responsibilities around budget for the circle unless it's delegated. Their main responsibility is to ensure the circle achieves the purpose of the circle. Okay, but they have responsibility for setting the priorities and the strategies, and that's essentially it. So that's one, lead link. There's 2 other roles, the secretary, which is essentially the keeper of the governance. This is called the governance, the org chart, if you will, all the policies and accountabilities. And it's to some extent an administrative role, but they have some authority around making final rulings around whether something's in process or not within governance. So they have that kind of authority. And then there's a third role, facilitator. So the secretary and the facilitator are elected roles. So the team elects who plays in those roles, and their role is essentially to brutally enforce the process. So if anyone tries to break process, their job is to just nip that in the bud. And there's a lot of overlap between these 2. One of the teams actually they do their Scrum stuff, and they resolve team issues within the Scrum context, and they deal with issues outside the Scrum context in the Holacracy tactical governance meeting. So they try to resolve things within their Scrum context first, and if they can't resolve it there, then they bring it up.
So it sounds like when they need teams, Scrum could work really well, and then it sounds like they just assign a product owner just a role in Holacracy. Do they just say, hey, for some effort, you create a Scrum?
So what's in here is there's a product owner role somewhere. There's a Scrum Master role in here. There's a Scrum team, which has a role can have multiple people assigned to it, and a person can be assigned to multiple roles. So there's a project team member, so Scrum team member, and we've got 3 people, 4 people assigned to it. So the Scrum rules are actually in here.
Neat.
Since adopting the Holacracy, there's been some things I've done to delegate authority and accountability into other roles to push that, and that's helped quite a bit. The other thing, what's kind of confusing about that for me is we're also going through this merger, and so it's hard for me to pull apart what things are a direct result of the Holacracy versus what's part of this merger. For example, there's some things I'm just not doing anymore because I know I'm not going to need to do it in the new org. So I just like, nah, screw it. Worry about that in July. And it's not me. In fact, I'm sort of the contracts wizard in the office. Right? So one of the other individuals in our office who's going to be leading a different division, she sent me an email. She goes, oh yeah, we want to get an OCM, organizational change management contract. Why can we get your help on that? And I says, yeah, that's not really an eGov thing. Really, you need to talk to the contracts manager in the new organization who's this other person. She goes, oh yeah, but we want your creativity, you know. And I says, oh yeah, well, in an eGov, I'd be more than happy to give you my creativity, but it costs you. I'm a per fee kind of guy now. So, I mean, you know, I'm sort of tongue in cheek, but not really. So, you know, one of my things is to maximize what not to do. And so I've been able to push some things off. I think I definitely feel much lighter in my feet now. I actually look forward to coming to work now. I decided, I get up, my alarm goes off at 5 in the morning. I'm usually awake at 4:30. I just, you know, think, oh yeah, and then sitting there, like, oh, I can't wait, then I gotta drive like an hour. And then, you know, get into work, and it's just exciting to think about all this stuff that, you know, we need to do, and I spend a lot more time. Probably the percentage has probably gone from 90-10 to probably more than 50-50 actually.
Wow.
It's probably closer to 60-40. But some of that might be just a matter of just the fact that we're at the end of the year, fiscal year. So I think that's pretty much it. I had a 5-minute warning. We're down to about a 2-minute warning now. Anything else? One last question?
What if you have accountabilities and roles you need to assign and nobody wants it?
Oh, that happens all the time. Yeah, that's actually kind of a fun thing. Well, fun and then annoying. It's annoying, and then as I think about it more, it becomes kind of fun. So that happens all the time. And the way it happens, actually, these are roles that aren't filled, the white ones. But what happens is, so this in part answers your question a little bit too. So what happens? You know, I'm not the manager. So people tell me, you know, I'm not the boss of them anymore. And it's great, okay, so I'm in this role, and we're all here together trying to solve these problems. But what still happens is people are trying to, and this happens in a hierarchy too, people try to get the managers to do stuff. And I find that really annoying, because I'm always like, no, you do. I mean, you're closer to the facts, you're closer to the data. So I'm the lead link. And in Holacracy, if a role goes unfilled, the lead link, you know, it's their role until they fill it, because they're the ones responsible for filling it. So people scheming, like, oh yeah, we need this. This is a big problem. We need it solved. Let's create a role, right? And so they create a role, and what they're really thinking about is there's no way in hell I'm gonna be able to fill it, but you know, it's going to be, you know, Michael's job to do those things. And I'm sitting there thinking about this, like, God, is there a way that I can object to that role? I can't. I don't have a valid objection. So they come up with these roles, which I think are stupid, but that's not a valid objection. And they remain unfilled. Now the thing though, and so they think that in fact one even say, oh, I don't want it, I beat you, you know, but not really. Because the rule in Holacracy is whatever roles you're assigned to and, you know, and have responsibility for, it's up to you as an individual to choose the priorities across those roles. You just deprioritize it to practically zero. So, you know, I usually tell them there's a reaction. I say, well, I don't think the role's actually going to solve the problem that you're trying to solve. You know, there's a way of doing it. So it's, you know, it's a maturity thing, and so it's one of those things I get frustrated with, and then I realize, and I get frustrated for two reasons. One is because it's basically just another way for employees to try to get their managers to do stuff, and I get frustrated second because it doesn't actually solve the problem. It's at the heart of retention. But I'm reassured by the fact that I have control over my priorities.
Yeah. What about where, say, there's two roles that are somewhat adjacent, they need to eventually kind of come together with two halves to make something work, and if each one of them kind of subsets what really needs to happen, and when they deliver their pieces, there's a gap between them and it coming together, how is that dealt if they kind of each point fingers?
Well, it comes up as a governance issue. If it's not, if accountabilities aren't clear, that comes up as a governance issue, and then we just clarify the accountability in between the two roles to make it more clear how each role, you know, interacts with the other. Yeah. So I think we're out of time.
Thanks a lot.